Do you want a better chair?
No,
sit lower.
no.
That seems weird. That only goes. That's actually for the Hammond and for the sitting in the other room. And
Yeah,
like,
it definitely makes you sit up like this.
well, and the way I have the speakers, I've got the Hammond over there is also my keyboard thing, so then I can sit up. And when people are playing, if I'm doing something, there's no arms.
So, are you a keyboard player as well?
No, I'm a bass player. I play everything in some form or another, and I have been in bands where I was a keyboard player and Hammond and traveling, and I was in a southern rock band doing that stuff for when I was in Nashville and Post and stuff like that. And so I dabble on a bunch of stuff, but you know.
So you said you were a bass player then? That was your main instrument?
I did a gig the other night.
So what's the main axe? What's the bass?
The main axe is a 64 body and a 62 neck. P bass.
P bass.
Flat wounds, and actually I just went to round wounds because of the gig thing that I was doing. So, of all the ones I've had over the years, and I keep going into and other ones, and like, oh, this is cool, and you know, wacky things like EB2Ds. You know, I love those. And are you a bass player?
No. So I mean, same as you. I dabble in all of these things, but you know, I collect sounds. So I have a '76 P bass, and then I've got a '67 4001, and I've got an old vintage Hofner. You know, just collecting the sounds.
Of all the basses I've had, and I was talking to somebody. Well, we were doing this gig the other day. James DePreto, the guitar player, and I were talking because he whipped out this Honeyburst Les Paul, and I was like, oh, I had a Honeyburst Les Paul bass card that was made for Alan Woody, and right when he was ready to take delivery, he was like, no, I think I want the cherry version. So I ended up with it, but I was living in studio apartments, and you can't carry 10 or 12 basses in a studio apartment. Like that was my possessions, like a rack full of clothes, a drawer full of socks, whatever, and all these basses, and it was just, you know, took up all the space, and it was dumb. So I started getting rid of stuff, and that's one I regret. But the one I've never had is a Rick. Never had a Rickenbacker.
My Rickenbacker came from a crazy story. I went to a storage unit to buy a Vibrachamp, and this is my, you know, credence to the world. If anyone is selling a Vibrachamp, you go. And so I went to buy a Vibrachamp, and the guy's like, yeah, I'm moving out of town, and I'm getting rid of everything in the storage unit today. Anything that doesn't get sold, it's getting left in the dumpster. I was like, you got any more musical instruments in there?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, there's a Telecaster bass. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting that he knows there's a Telecaster bass in there.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, call me when you find it. Let me know how much you want. Calls me about 5 hours later, and he's like, hey, I found that bass, $500. And I was like, wonderful, you know, and I show up, and it's the '67 Rickenbacker. You know, it was heavily played, and the bridge pickup had been pulled out and replaced with a Bartolini. But worth every penny.
For $500, man, like you could find, new old stock pickup in there or something like,
I actually pulled the original neck pickup out and just put it in a drawer, and then I had the Seymour Duncan Custom Shop do their Rickenbacker pickups.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Nice.
So,
wow, what a find.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great rule.
Yes.
If you see a Vibrachamp, buy it.
Yeah, and it's always served me well. Another one that I went and I found a Vibrachamp, and I said, yeah, I'll buy the Vibrachamp. And he's like, cool, take it. And then I picked it up, and there's a Big Muff in the back of it. And I was like, oh, there's a Big Muff in here. What do you want for the Big Muff? He's like, you take the amp, an extra $10, and you can have it. I was like, cool. It was one of only 4 known Vero board handmade Mike Matthews Big Muffs in the world. I sold it for $4,800. Yeah.
40. Whoa.
Yeah, Josh Gott has it now.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's
that's awesome.
Yeah, if you see a Vibrachamp, guys, go.
Yeah, general rule. Well, as a matter of fact, there's usually one that sits in that corner over here, and I have a silver face with the black line. So it was that in between.
The drip edge.
The drip edge. I have one of those, and I'm having a 10-inch speaker put in it.
Oh.
So there's a guy, Fender Amp Repair, Mike Pascal, who also has Fat Jimmy amps.
Yes.
So he makes those amps. I have one of his Princetons in the other room. It's fantastic.
I've never heard one. I've seen them on the internet. It seems like, you know, out here in the West Coast, they are very loved.
Yeah. They're you know, he does an amazing job, you know, able to cut the tremolo speed in half and do some really cool things. So you get this really sort of pulsy kind of cool sound and tone and everything. He does a great job. And so he's combing through it. I had one of the pots went out, and I was like, yeah, it's got some caps, and like let's just do that. And I said, well, you know, it'd be really cool if I could. The only thing I don't like is the 8-inch speaker. I'd love to have a 10-inch in there, and so I have a baffle made, and it's on his way, and he's putting his own 10-inch in it, and so I'm gonna sort of a souped up, and of course keep the other baffle is up in the attic just for those reasons. But yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah,
you know, a man after my own heart. So when did you start making the transition from musician into being in the studio, and then did you start saying I want to go master records, or did you get in the studio in another way and then end up here somehow?
You know, the mastering path was, I would say, unintentional and sort of fortuitous. One of those things when I like teaching classes and stuff, talking to folks and kids getting into it, or getting into it is be open to possibilities, open doors. See what happens, and sometimes you want to follow. And I was I was born in Michigan, but I grew up in Nashville.
Where?
East Lansing.
I'm from Clarkston. We were born in Pontiac.
Oh wow! I grew up right across the street from Michigan State. From my dad went, and it was just one of those.
So you remember Pine Knob? Did you ever get to go?
No.
Okay, the big outdoor venue where Eddie Money played every summer.
No.
Okay, yeah, that was right next to our house. We grew up.
Oh, cool. No, I never got to go there. No, I moved out when I was 10.
Okay.
But my dad lived there until he passed, and I would go back once a year at least or more and go hang. And so I didn't other than maybe like camping trips up north, go head up to UP or Mackinac Island or Sleeping Bear Dunes or all the different places you hit on a summer vacation in Upper Michigan.
Absolutely.
So it would do things like that even in the teenage years and more, and rather than something like Pine Knobs. But I Nashville, and it was nothing about music. I mean, I played in the marching band. I played a bunch of instruments, violin at 5th grade, and then clarinet for like 6th and 7th, and maybe 8th or something. And then I played trombone in the marching band. I went to the marching band, the director, and I said, because I always wanted to play drums. I was still like one of those things, like I want to play drums in the band director. She goes, "That's great. You know what we really need? A trombone player." And I said, "That thing?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, cool." So I did, and I did that for 4 years, and I got into playing bass because I was really interested in. There was one of the guys in the trombone section was a huge, Jocko Geddy Lee, Steve Berlin, what was the guy? Mark, level 42. Anyway, there was just trying to think of all the bass players from that. And growing up in Michigan, Motown was huge, and I was already a huge Jamerson fan and all the stuff that Bob Babbitt and all the stuff that came out of there. Bob was in Nashville for a long time, and I think he passed a year or two or something. I think he did, but used to see him around at clubs playing around.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Everybody sings Jamerson's praises, but I think Bob Babbitt is just as good. That Bernadette bass line.
Oh my God, that's that's just so stellar.
Yeah,
unbelievable. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was in Nashville, and I went to college in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where I met Mike Grimes. Owns a record store and a club in Nashville called Grammys, and the Basement East. And so he and I, among other things, he and I got in a band, started a band, and became roommates and best friends. And anyway, so we got out of college. Both of us quit. We didn't quite get through. Got into other things. I went for math and computer science, and as a double major, and didn't quite finish, just playing in bands and working and stuff like that, and ended up we went back to Nashville, and I started working on things that, well, when I was the engineering side of things, I didn't intend to necessarily, but when I started playing in bands, so like that was the first, I didn't really realize there was somebody in the back of the room twisting knobs to make the people in the front of the room sound as good, hopefully, as they could. And so when I walked into kind of the first club I ever played, I was like, well, wait, what is that? Well, I want to know what that is. And so in Bowling Green, there was one club. It was called Picasso's, and it was the main club, and it was on Highway 65. So anybody going to and from Nashville would always stop at this club. Everybody in the indie band circuit and stuff like that. So got to see some amazing bands passing through, and I would find myself in the club, and I'd be talking to the sound man, like, "What are you doing? What's that? What's this? What's that?" And it just became, in short, it was, "All right, I'll show you a few things." And then it was, "All right, I'm gonna take a break. You run it for a few minutes." And then it was, "I'm taking the night off. You got it." And then it was, "I quit. You're the sound man." I was like, "Okay." So I got into that, and I was, and I started mixing other people. And when the bands I was in, taking that and realizing that it's similar to the studio, working with them, and then somebody would go, "Well, hey, you want to work with me? You want to work on this band or whatever?" So then I started mixing other records and recording people and having fun and getting into it, and did that for a bunch of years, and decided I needed a break. So I hopped on my motorcycle, and just on a whim, 3 days later, I did a month-long road trip by myself. I had never done anything like that before, and I was like, I just got to get out. And so backpack and a tent and strapped it on my bike and crossed the country. So I started in Nashville. I was like St. Louis and up into Denver and Wyoming and all of that, and then the coast, got to here and came down and went through Texas and, rode my bike across the London Bridge, in Arizona. That was all fun. You had those kinds of things. But while I was here, so about halfway through the trip, while I was here in San Francisco, I called back to check my messages. That's back when we had those little cassette guys, you didn't have all of the, what we have today with all the stuff. There was a place called Rocket Lab in San Francisco that said, hey, we're looking for another mastering engineer. We got your name from, turned out it was Sandy Perlman, who passed my name along. Joe Baldridge in Nashville gave it to Sandy, and Joe and I had been, and still are great friends. Joe just took over Ocean Way teaching over there. So really proud of him and what he's been doing. But because of him, I got, sort of passed along, and I just called him and I said, I'm actually in town. I don't have a resume with me. I'm just here passing through. How about I come by and talk to you? And so I did, and I spent a couple extra days and stayed here, and Nancy Basinger, the owner, and Paul Stubblevine, they showed me around, showed me all the different little towns, and I was like, this place is really kind of awesome. With mastering, it's still sort of, to some people, kind of nebulous. Now it's sort of over, I don't want to say like, now people kind of know what it is, but still people kind of don't know what it is, even though there's a whole lot of hyphenations. I'm a mixing mastering engineer, and putting plugins on the backside of a mix is not mastering, in my opinion. So I'll also be kind of soapboxy about some stuff.
Hey, no, get soapboxy.
Get soapboxy.
Yeah,
well, that shit ain't mastering then. That's just finishing the mix.
Yes.
Anyway, when I realized what it was, because at that point this was 30 years ago, so we were still using F1 and 1630s and striping tapes every morning, and my job was to come in and clean the brass patch bays and and stripe time code on 1630 tapes, and and the computers were just coming into it. And what I was really fascinated about was my math and computer science background, which now has just gone to shit from years focusing on other things. I can't remember half of that stuff now, but because of the technology and what was coming out of the Bay Area, because all the tech companies were here. Ampex was here, but Apogee was starting to build converters and stuff for the 1630s, then getting into their world, and all the DAWs were getting started, and it was just a huge, like, oh my God, there's an amazing amount of technology coming out of this. This is where this is being driven. Even getting into the distribution side and the streaming services later on, and all the companies that are building their backbone on content distribution and then the formats and stuff. And I just thought, wow, this is fantastic. I'm sort of at the beginning of this. And that what clicked for me was the idea of the bigger picture, of standing at 10,000 feet and realizing that this, mastering is about how is it, not what is it. Mm-hmm. I don't, and when we're listening in best form, I'm at my best when I don't care if it's country or jazz or rock or blues or spoken word or whatever. It's how does it present itself? Yes. Because that's what people care. I mean, and it was a big training. It was really weird. And this came up in a conversation the other day, the gig I was talking about. We were, the ways of listening and the training to be able to disassociate from the content and just hear how things combine, what's going on, and how they're going to present themselves. And not only in that, then knowing how they're going to translate to a speaker or headphones or somebody's car, and or LPs, and how the different master is going to sound. And so I was just fascinated by the technology and the sort of perception aspect of it. And so mastering became like this, oh my God, this is the center point of all of my interests. So I said, give me 2 weeks to get back. And so I rode and I did the South, and I got back, and I remember camping in the Grand Canyon on the 4th of July. Mistake. All the campgrounds are full, so I didn't. There's a backstory where I ended up sleeping in the cemetery without knowing it, throwing a tent. whole other thing. But I got back and I said, I'll do this. I'll come out for a couple of years. And I had known Benny Purcell in Nashville, a family friend, and I had known him. He's like, "Oh, go do that for a couple of years, and then, then you come back, you come work for me." And but I came out here and I was like, "Okay, cool. Here's my plan. I'll go do the California experience for a few years and learn this craft, get it under my belt, and go back, And I loved it out here. And so 2 years became 3 and became 4, and at 10 years, I still had my car, but I still had Tennessee plates on my car at 10 years. I don't know how I got away with it. But the moment the moment I made the decision, I was like, okay, I'm transferring my car to here. At 10 years, I did, and the next week, my car got stolen. Yeah. So I'm like, you know what? I'm here. This was meant to be kind of thing.
Welcome home.
Now it's 30 years, so I'm here. And
you brought up a name that I got to ask about, which is Denny Purcell. You
Yeah.
know, Burgess speaks so highly of Denny, you know, and that he was just the ultimate guy when it came to Nashville mastering.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know too much about him. Tell me about that.
Well, he's kind of one of the guys. He's one of the guys, like one of the founder, the pioneers. He's you know, if you think of Bob Ludwig or man, my brain is fried this morning. Doug Sax. I was trying to think of Doug Sax and the folks. Bernie Grunman. You know, so you have like those kinds of guys. Denny was one of those kinds of guys to me. Like he was somebody who was a pioneer.
But he was also a family friend.
Yeah, he was. His daughter was a friend of my stepsister. So my mom got married again. Her husband's daughter lived with us when she was going to high school, and Denny's daughter Rissy was a good friend of hers, and so then I knew through family connections.
So was that?
And I didn't really at the time. I just was like, oh, cool. He's this guy in the music business who wants to do stuff. Like I didn't really know his stature until I was here.
I was just about to ask.
Yeah. I just thought he was like a cool guy, did a bunch of stuff, and had a great place. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I really kind of learned. I was like, oh crap, this is the guy. Like this is great. I didn't end up going back. Andrew Mendelsohn ended up working for Denny, which was great. And Andrew's a great friend and fantastic engineer. And all things worked out the way they did. And I'm really happy for him and where he is and what he's doing.
No, it's so inspiring to me to hear something like from a very talented mastering engineer such as yourself to say, oh, Denny was a friend of the family, you know? And when I hear something like that, I'm like, I wonder how that inspired the story. But it's so interesting for me to hear that you really saw the weight of what Denny was throwing around in Nashville once you got out here and people started singing his praises to you, I'm assuming, right?
Well, yeah, because, and we all have that, right? I mean, in some aspect of it, we're sort of myopic about what's right in front of us.
Yes.
Like you sort of know people and you go, oh, okay, cool, I know you from so-and-so, and oh, cool, we're hanging out, we had this great dinner, and we had this cool conversation, all that, and then you find out, you're like, oh, man, you've been to the moon? Fuck, man, that's awesome. I did not know that. I'm like, oh, okay, or something like that. And so
that's amazing, and you're out here, you're working on with the 1630. How long before you decided to open up Coast and go independent?
Well, so that's been a long journey. So I worked at a lot of places along the way to get there. And I talked to him yesterday, and I'm still partners with Paul Stubblebine as a mentor, with somebody who is just absolutely, essential for me to be where I am right now. So he and a handful of other folks, but he's. We have a label. Well, I've got them in here. Well, I'll pull it out real quick. So nobody was doing this at the time. And nobody, there's like 25 companies around the world who's doing this. The last tapes that were released, and we designed our own flanges.
Oh my God.
We engraved the serial number and the catalog number into each. So
how many releases have you done?
We've got like 35, I think.
Is there a subscription I can get on?
There actually is a way that we have.
I want in.
Go to tapeproject.com.
I'm in. Yes, I would like this to show up to my house. I don't even own a 1/4-inch machine at this point, but I will go buy another one. I'll go buy like so we have down in Salina is Chad Cassim, and he bought all of Doug's stuff.
So Chad is somebody who we know very well.
Yeah,
Chad jumped into this because we're friends because of going to the audiophile shows and all the stuff that we would do to promote this at the time. And then Chad's like, oh, I need to get into this too. I want to do something. And so that's how he got into it.
Yeah, I could just see this being like, I'm going to talk to Chad. I'm going to figure out exactly what Doug did to those JH110s, and I'm going to do it and play these tapes on it.
Right. he's probably the only other, like his company's probably the only other one that's doing it similar in quality to us.
Oh, is he doing tape releases?
He's doing tape releases.
Oh,
now.
I didn't know he was doing 1/4-inch.
Yeah, he's doing 1/4-inch. He's doing tape releases. Yeah, so because of that, we can pivot to what somebody else, and if somebody wants a particular tape formula, we can do that too. We use the ATR tape.
Yes.
We started out in the first few years while Mike was getting his system up and running, Mike Spitz, getting the ATR tape going. We were using the 468 was our basis. So like the first year, so we started as a subscription, pick 10, pick 8, whatever it is, get matching serial numbers, at this level. We'll send you a test tone tape to go with it. But a lot of this, what we found was that if you're just playing back, ATRs are great, and some of our audiophile customers have 102s or Studers in their living rooms. But an Atari 5050 or a Technics 1500 or 17, like those are good heads on them.
Yeah.
Great.
What's that? I always loved that Pioneer, the one that was like with the flanges that sat very far into the box. The 707, I think.
I can't remember that. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Yeah.
It had the two VU meters that came in.
Yeah, that was cool. Yeah.
I think I may have to buy one and do something.
What was it? I wish that and Mike Spitt's passing was sad, and for a whole lots of reasons, because he was just the guy.
Yes.
But he was working on a new tape machine. But when the tapes stopped becoming, when all of a sudden tape stopped, and it was coming that RMG was getting out of it, and everybody was quitting making tape. He's like, I've got a business fixing tape machines. If there's no tape, there's no business fixing tape machines. So let's pivot and start making tape, and then we'll go to machines. And he didn't get that far.
Yes.
So I would have been really interested to see what he had come up with.
But they're still manufacturing tape, though, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then there's another company that's doing tape now out of France, right?
Yeah, RMG. Or no, it's called something else now.
Yeah, it's the people who took over
It's
RMG.
the people who took over RMG. Yeah, it's the whole...
Isn't it something like Her Majesty's Masters or something like that? It's got some weird name.
Yeah, actually, I can't. At this moment, I can't. This morning in the caffeination state. I don't remember. So Paul, became a friend and mentor, and you asked me about studios, and so I stayed at this place at Rocket Lab. There was another an engineer who's still here in the Bay Area doing fantastic work, Ken Lee.
Okay.
So Ken and Paul were the two main engineers there, and then I came on. And then eventually Ken decided he was going to start his own place and is still running it, and out of his house. Well, he had a separate thing, and so now he's kind of doing that thing too. But and then Paul decided after a handful of years, I think I was like 6 years into Rocket Lab, where he decided it was time to just sort of break off and do his own thing. And so then I was there until, long story short, a husband and wife getting divorced, and they just we're going to shut this down. So I ended up connecting with the plant, and John Cunaberti. John came to me and wanted to learn mastering. He's a fantastic recording engineer, and he wanted to learn mastering. And he said, "Tell you what, I know this is happening, and I know the people at the plant. Let's see if we can get a room built over there, and let's build a business." So we built plant mastering. I was the chief, and was there for a couple of years until it was time to, move on. As things do, sometimes you get to that. And I ended up getting back together with Paul. So Paul was working out of Hyde Street Studios here in the Bay Area, or in San Francisco at the time. He had Studio C, and so we hatched a plan in a year that I was there with him, was to find another space that he and I could work together on and build a couple of rooms, rather than trying to work schedules out of a singular room. And let's build a facility. And in our seeking out, we came across Dan Alexander was getting rid of Coast Recorders, and we had access to the Coast Recorders building as well. So Coast Recorders lived in a handful of 4 different places, I think, in San Francisco in different eras. But we ended up in one that was the Bill Putnam room that Bill and George Horn were part of. So George Horn was. So speaking of legacies and stuff, it's like there's a master. Paul learned from George. Yes. So sort of the lineage of Bay Area engineers. So Paul, George, Ringo, John. So anyway, so George was taught Paul, and they worked together for tons of years and then he did, and then me learning, and then coming back to this spot. And it turns out the long story back to that is when I ended up over at Fantasy. Well, let me come back to that, because George comes back into that picture a little bit. But Paul and I took over. We ended up taking over the Mission Street Coast Recorders and had the recording studio in the back and the 2 mastering rooms in front. And that was 2001, and we built 2 surround rooms. So we were doing, we started doing that then, and SACDs, and we were getting into, the Sonoma system and, doing stuff like that. And so that was my first foray actually into.
Did you have Pacific Microsonics?
We did. Oh. Well, because they're here.
I know. Exactly. I have to ask. I was like, you're in Berkeley, and you don't. Is there a Berkeley around here?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? The Pacific Microsonics. I got rid of. I got the last new screen. The last one I had a screen that, and so of the only parts that were left.
Yeah.
When that got when I realized that there were going to be no more parts, I started searching.
Yeah.
I was like, I got to find something else because these are going to go down. And
Is this the Horus Stone here?
that's I just put that in, and and this goes back to the fact that Neumann Sennheiser bought merging.
Yes.
I'm dipping my toe back into that again.
Okay. But
I was in it and I got out of it because I
understand.
yeah.
Yes.
And so now with some promise, I'm back. I'm tapping the
Because this is
toe.
good stuff, you know?
Yeah. What I ended up with was Bricasti, the M1s.
I saw that. You had a whole stack of those things
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Machine rooms in the other room. 6 of them to do all this.
Oh, they're still here.
They're still here. Well, actually, I just pulled them out. Interesting timing wise. I just pulled them out. I've been listening to the Burl, the BDA 8, I think they call it.
The new one that you can take the transformer out.
Well, there's sort of these guys.
Yep.
But then there's the version that is just a straight D to A. Same circuit, no transformer,
Yep.
no adjustment.
Yes.
Trim pots, but no matching your system kind of stuff. Dante Network. I was having some problems doing AES 67 and Dante as moving into that world and all of that. And I decided it was I've been using those for a very long time. They were the first converters that I thought matched the D to A of the Pacific Microsonics.
The
Bricasti,
Bricasti.
the M1s. They sound fantastic.
I'm going to say this, from across the coast, I thought that, you killed the reverbs.
I did?
Yeah, you
What?
personally.
Oh,
I
sorry.
was like, I'm kidding. I'm making a joke. I believe that the Bricasti M7 reverb is abandonware. You will never get version 3. If you love it as it is, be happy with it.
Yeah. I had worked on before, so when we left, so getting out of Coast recorders,
And going into fantasy.
going into fantasy. So
Yeah.
I spent
Before, I got one question about that. As a mastering engineer,
Yes.
who's clearly at that point dedicated to your life to being a mastering engineer,
Yes.
was that a pain in the ass having the recording studio in the fucking front of that building?
yes and no and no and yes. Like it depends on So
Because clients got fed from one side, but also you got to clean up after these dicks, and all these people are coming in, and there's so much more foot traffic in a session, like a recording session that's locked out.
and hand holding,
Yes.
and all of that throughout. So we brought somebody in to run the recording studio.
Okay. Yep.
So
you
had
got
the
to be
space,
hands off.
let somebody run it.
Yep.
So at first there was a guy who was in there, was on for a 5-year term to be on. Didn't pan out after a couple of years. It was good that I won't mention any names, time to move on. And then we brought somebody else in for a little bit, and that didn't work out either. So still Paul and I kind of running, and Paul was handling all of that at the time. He was the leaseholder, and so I was working for Paul.
Yep.
So getting it. So back to your question about like getting into my path to get to here, but. And then after a certain period of on the lease or so, Paul's kind of like, I think it's kind of time to wind down a little bit. I'm going to semi-retire. I'm going to move to this. Tape Project was already fully running, and so he put a room together where we were doing the duping. So all the machines, the engraving, and all that stuff. He had a spot, and Paul is beyond being just fantastically talented and intelligent, is a pack rat and has so much gear and stuff. He needed a warehouse, and so it worked out that the warehouse and the Tape Project and his room. So anyway, so then I took over the lease, and I brought in Matt Boudreau from Working Class Audio. So Matt's pocket. So Matt was a great friend. We had played together. Matt's a drummer. Matt's a fantastic drummer, and we had played together in a band, and he had a studio, and we were always together working on projects and stuff. And I was like, hey, you wanna take over the studio? And so he came in and was there for 4 years, almost 5. But some things came up where he needed to exit also. And then then I brought in, for the next sort of period, somebody else to run the studio with. And then it got to be time. Well, so this seems to be a lot. The short story of the long was that the building was owned by a guy who had a trust, and half of the block anyway, they did some building on it. There were 3 buildings in a row that the guy owned, and my landlord was in one of them, but they were just managing all of the property because it was the Mercy Commercial, the Catholic diocese. They wanted to build on the empty lots, part of that low-income housing for families and for elderly. And the guy that owned the whole property and all of that said, great, if you do this, you got to manage these 3 properties. Here's a 100-year lease, but if I pass, then you get right of first refusal to buy the property. That's what happened. They wanted their building. I was gonna get that building, and somebody else was gonna get the other one. And we went through this whole process until the daughter said, that's not exactly what the lease says, and fought it in court. So for the 3 years she fought it in court, Dolby took over that corner, built their new facility. Twitter took over that whole block right behind us and built that whole thing. And Uber was right there and did that. And so then the market value more than tripled. The court case came back and they said, nope, they get first right, but then nobody could afford it. So that was the impetus for like, let's just get out of here.
Yeah.
It's still sitting there empty right now. It's been 7 or 8, 9 years now or something that it's empty. It's been sitting there. The Chinese developer came in and bought all 3 of those buildings, and we're gonna demo it and build a high rise. And going through the city, way too much information, but going through the city to get the permits and stuff like that, you gotta get the demo permits before you can build, and they never got that far. And then the pandemic, and then, and all that stuff. So it's just sitting there, this amazing sounding tracking room. But the reason I got to that was because you were talking about Bricassi. So the version 3, I had gone in and done impulse responses of this Bill Putnam tracking room. George Horn and Bill built this room. It was a most amazing, like it was just an awesome sounding room. Everything felt so natural, and you'd have a full band sitting in there doing stuff without headphones, and everybody could hear themselves just fine. I mean, it was just awesome.
Yep.
Best way to record: take the headphones off.
Yes.
Play with the musicians. Play the song, not the part.
Yeah, and Coast, that was like the classic Bill Putnam Studio A at Ocean Way style.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We had one in Omaha that got torn down about 3 months ago.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so it was called Warehouse, and he built it in, I believe, 74 or something like that.
Oh,
And
man.
Yeah, getting a University of Nebraska Medical Center is putting a high rise on it right now.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Well, I was hoping version 3 of the Bricassi was going to be that room.
Oh.
That's where, this is why that goes all the way back to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you know my pain.
I know your pain because I want that room.
Yes.
So yeah, unfortunately that didn't work out. But so that's what prompted the fantasy move, was to start looking into that. And I started trying to find spaces. Space around, and I needed a couple of rooms. I was building a multi-room facility, and I wanted to, I had that, and I wanted to expand that a little bit. And Jeffrey Wood, who was managing Fantasy at the time, there was studios A, B, and D, but Studio C was sort of off the radar, off the map over there, and like nobody really knew about it or if it was still around. Well, it turns out it was just the building owners. It was closed down, walled off. They built walls around it. There was the only entrance was through the service door on the outside. Jeffrey was like, well, I'm going to show you this one room, but this is a long shot to get this back. And I said, okay. And anyway, went in and it was great. It was the old Studio C. It was Creedence's room.
Yeah, the Creedence Clearwater room.
Yeah,
Yep.
that they turned into the Foley room for the Salzance. So all the films. So that room, all the Amadeus and like all of that stuff, all the Foley stuff was done in that room. But it gave me the little platform and still had the pits. And so I worked with Bob Hodis, fantastic. Bob's tunes this. Bob's been tuning every room I had that I've been in the last 30 years, except for the plant was the one place he didn't.
Okay.
Went in and we designed the walls, and we did, we rebuilt it and turned it into a 3-room facility and lounge and like we did the whole thing to that space. It was great. And some issues with the landlord and some issues with a handful of things that caused me to reevaluate a little bit.
I heard it kind of turned into like a trap studio over there with a bunch of production rooms upstairs and stuff, right?
Well, they took out, so the only studio left, I'm actually still on the lease over there.
Okay.
But I brought in a guy who was doing, has a company that does sound design for film.
Okay.
He wanted the Foley pits.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want those Foley pits to turn into what happened to the rest of the studios at the, George was still there in Fantasy. His room was still up, but they took down all the other recording studios. They gutted them and turned them into offices when they closed it down. So they're just gone. Chambers gone. Everything's gone, except George's room, and he was still there until he passed a year and a half or so ago. all his equipment was sold, and his protege is now taking over his business, and she's up and running and thriving, doing great. His room is still there; it's just empty.
Which room was his?
Did you? So you'd been there. If you walked into the lobby, so not the like the front desk lobby, but when you walked into the main room, when the double doors, and then that was the sort of fantasy. He was right there on the left.
Okay.
And you go to that left door, and then. It was sort of a little hallway, and then you'd go down a couple of steps. So he was sort of under a little bit.
So that wasn't actually part of Fantasy. It was just his own room up there in the building.
Yeah, and he happened to be within the walled version because days gone by when Concord and Fantasy, and it was all different ownership and sort of different management and being run, he was part of that team. But because he had all that in there and built all that, and they were able to go, well, you just keep your room, you'll just be inside our little thing. The thing about the studios then became, I think the problem was that they were owned by the building people, the people that own the building, rather than a private entity. So they, in the money making, keeping a studio open, I think they decided they could make more money with offices, and they started trying to turn the building and all the film folks and all the people doing independent, the Saul Zaentz Media Center and all that stuff there, they started trying to get people out and turn it into medical facilities. They wanted biotech.
Oh.
Because, that's way more lucrative than the music business. And so they started shutting stuff down, but I had a lease, they couldn't shut that studio down since so it's still actually there, and he's still in there with his company doing
Doing Foley
and sound design and stuff. Got a couple of rooms.
So I have so many questions.
But all those problems led to this. But sorry.
Well, one thing that I'm hearing is that you've moved into a lot of rooms that were already pre-established in some way. And
I love this question.
Maybe they weren't, mastering studios, but they were something to do with sound.
Yeah.
Do you get fucked up over the fact that you've spent so much money investing into these spaces that you then move on from? Because I put everything into fucking make believe, and if I had to move out of that 3.5 fucking years later, it's already turned all my hairs gray. I thought I had a heart attack once, so I'd be dead.
Shit, really?
Well, no. I mean, I'm joking.
Okay. I'll make sure you're okay.
No.
But this is a stressful business.
Yeah. It's one of those. I definitely it hurts sometimes.
Right. Well, that's why I didn't sleep very well last night. I was like, well, I got a week coming up. What do I got to do? I got to take care of it. And it's a lot to run it.
Absolutely. And clearly, you're not a guy who's out here half-assing anything.
No.
And I saw your room at Coast, and I saw your room at Fantasy, and you invested time, attention, value, energy, and clearly capital into those spaces.
Yeah.
And clearly you're doing amazing work, and you're getting very, very great recognition amongst your peers. So your bills are paid. But has it ever been one of those things where you're like, this is a hard pill to swallow, having to move out of one of those rooms?
You know what? Up until this, that's a great question because kind of up until this point, and it was one of those things I was having enough problems at Fantasy. So my wife and I bought this house. We got in about, 9 years or so ago now. And this was all unused space. This was under the house. This was just dirt. There was no access the way you guys came down, the back deck, the whole back.
This was just dirt.
This was all dirt. There's an upstairs bedroom. There's a, first floor thing. And this was all dirt. That's why we're underground. And same, the other room, same thing. And so it was just all unused space. And so we were like, well, what can we do? There was really no access to get to the backyard very well either. And so we thought, well, what can we do? What can we turn this into as a player? I had all these instruments and I was like, I just want to have a spot to work. I want to be able to work at home. I always had, you know how it goes, you always have some rig, so late at night you got to make a tweak to something or you got to edit or something that doesn't take necessarily the room, but you need the facilities to get stuff done. I always had that somehow at home, and I was like, well, let's just turn this into something. So my wife and I went to the architect and we started looking at things, and we got into the plans and permits. It started with a crack in the foundation on the side or in this wall right over here. And we're like, well, let's fix this. We're in earthquake zone. Let's just do this. And then I was having enough issues with Fantasy in that situation. And I thought, you know what? Maybe we need to re-envision this. So we put the permit on hold and redesigned it and said, I had to go through the whole process of home studio. I had a really hard, because of the level that I want to work at.
This is not a home studio.
This is not a home studio.
No.
No. This is, yeah.
This is a studio that is at a house.
Yes, right. This is, and the intent was, if I'm going to do this, like as you said, and thank you for all the kind comments, but all the other studios I've been at, like, I want to work, for one, I want to work with a client level, but I also want to do that level of work.
Yes.
I'm very intent on making, like, this is precision stuff. Mastering to me, and so the final, it's like it has to be spot on. It's like, you know, your monitoring environment. You know, I use the analogy. You know, if you're all of the monitoring, all of my decisions are based on the monitoring. If the monitoring is off, so are my decisions.
You want to watch Michael's face cringe real fast on camera?
Oh, yeah.
I do all my mastering on NS10s with Pro Equifers in them.
You know what? I just did that for your benefit. You know what? The thing is, and I think that's brilliant, actually.
Yeah.
Because as a very talented engineer, you know your tools.
That's
it's not the tools, it's you.
And that's how I feel about it. And that's what I preach to every young kid. Like, get a monitor that you feel comfortable with and stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, and then at that point, decide if you want to change.
Yeah.
You know, and at this point in my life, NS10s have become very long in the tooth, and I may be looking at some ATCs to try out. You know, I've had very good luck with those.
Yeah.
But for me, I just picked something 10 years ago and I never fucking changed it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Too, and I'm really glad you because you know your tools. I would never cringe at anybody's decision making. It's only it's the results.
Yep.
And that's what our clients hire us for. It's not because I've got that thing or this or that cable or whatever it happens to be. It's just because of what. I understand what they need, and I'm here to solve problems for them.
Yes.
Our jobs are be able to say, you've got this, and when people ask what mastering is, to me, it's two things. When besides the, all the technical, the art and the craft and all that stuff, it's developing an opinion.
Yep.
Figuring out how to get to, I think it sounds like this. I think it could or should sound like that. Everything else in between is experience and all of that. It's like, if you don't have that opinion of what you think it sounds like or what you think it should sound like, everything else is an exercise of time wasting. You're just twisting knobs for no reason, hoping to get to something that you go, oh, okay, cool. But then you're so off kilter with what reality is. It may be awesome, it may be awful, and you think it's either or alternately,
Yeah, and developing that opinion and figuring out what actually feels good.
Yeah.
And, everyone wants to talk about translation in mastering.
Yeah.
And it's not the translation of your speakers or the translation of your room. It's the translation of your opinion.
Right. I get that.
Yeah. If you make the decisions that you make and then it translates to as many systems as well as possible.
Right.
I think that's very important.
Well, see, and the thing is, what we really want, again, bottom line, this is art, right? And so what we want as engineers is to make our clients happy. We're service providers first and foremost. We're here to make our clients happy. And what makes them happy? People buying their records. And what if somebody puts on a record and they like it and they go, hey, check out this record. This is really good. And that spreads. If somebody puts something on and they go, well, in the car it sounds like this, but on headphones or another, I don't really want it. Nah, it's too compressed. Don't get me on that soapbox. If it's whatever it is, people's first reaction is to turn it off and move on to something else.
Yes.
And getting that second chance is tough. And so our job is to make sure that we give people a second chance.
Yes.
For our clients. And so that's the service we provide. Yeah, that translatability is like really, my job is not to make it sound like me. My job is to make what comes out of here, make the artist sound more like the artist.
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yep.
Make them more like them when they leave than they were when they were here.
Yep.
Well, however that
I
verbiage
think
works.
that's a wonderful way to look at it. And a lot of people, there's a lot of black art as far as what happens in mastering or what's done. And I think a lot of people want to roll mastering up into Ozone and Mix Assistant, and that's not what it is, because it doesn't feel,
right.
It doesn't feel what's actually happening to the music. And sure, it can make a song brighter, but who's to say that that's what needed?
That's what's like. Is that needed or not? Like, is that the thing? Right. And people's idea for so long has been mastering me is to make it louder and brighter. I'll tell you my biggest pet peeve. One of the soapbox, and I get it to some extent, but anything on the master bus pisses me off.
Really?
Yeah.
Like anything at all?
Except a limiter, like a safety limiter.
Like even when someone's mixing on an SSL with the stereo compressor?
Okay, I'll rephrase in a way, because this is very could be controversial, soapboxy or whatever. Is like, do what sounds good.
Yes.
The idea is you're doing something because you're still trying to. You're creating a vibe and a feel. More times than not, I see people start a mix with a preset of their master bus has all of this stuff, and they're mixing through their master bus chain.
So can I tell you my whole philosophy?
Yeah.
So I do mix through the same chain every time.
Yeah.
I keep it very what I would consider light-handed. I've got an SSL stereo bus compressor at 2-to-1, and then I use the Soundtech, you know. But my Soundtech is set up the same way every day. I don't change it from song to song. I've got +2 at 19, I've got +2 at 4K, and +2 at 60. And in my mind, how I look at it is, if I could buy an SSL that sounded like this, I would just buy that SSL.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't want it to change. I want my console to sound like this.
Right.
And then I go to work, you know?
So question for you.
Yes.
Why not tune your room so that already has that sound? Like, so looking
No, because
at,
I want that on my print. I want.
But if your room already has that, then the decisions you make on the guitars, drums, whatever, you're going to build that sound into it without having to do that.
I'm talking about specifically for mixing.
Okay, that's what I'm talking. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is,
Okay.
you know, you're saying why not build that into the decision-making process in the room? And I think that my room translates fairly well. It's just one of those things where if I could buy an SSL that was brighter and bassier, I would do that, you know? Because I want that console to make things bigger and brighter,
Got it.
which I feel like is part of my job. But it's one of those things where I think it's really a lesson in chasing your tail to pull up a song and then spend like 30 minutes EQing the crap out of it before you even start mixing it, and then mix it, add a bunch of high end, add a bunch of high mid-range to things, and then go and redo that again at the end and like fine tune that. That has never really worked out for me. What I've, always looked at is more like, this is the frequency curve that I'm going through, and then I'm going to make my decisions in the room based on that, because adding that high end there, I don't need to go add as much 10K at my channels because I've got a little bit more lift happening on the stereo bus at that 19K.
Got it.
And, the 4K on the Soundtech is way more pleasing than it is on the SSL, So the fact that there's a little bit of a lift there means that I'm almost never adding that on the SSL because it sounds like, scratching a plate with a fork.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? That makes sense because, and I appreciate that, and I respect that because that's intent. You have intent with this. There's a reason for doing it. And I would say, and you're using artisticness, like this is what I want to get out of this. What I see often, let's just say and trying to get kids these days from coming up thinking that their process is, it's like somebody goes, oh, well, Michael Brower puts like 6 compressors on, and then somebody else goes, well, I read that on this forum or whatever, and so now I'm going to do that. But that's not necessarily the right thing to do. He's doing that because he's a very talented engineer and has intent for what he's doing, and somebody else is just mimicking what he's doing but doesn't have the same intent. Those are two different
Absolutely.
things.
And one of my favorite things about Michael Brower is when you go read through his frequently asked questions on his website, one of the best things that he says is when he talks about mixing John Mayer, and he did it with his Browerized compression method, and Mayer said, no, we need to come back and we need this to feel like an old school blues record. And he says, I mix it straight through the stereo bus and I put a LA3A on the vocal.
Right. Yeah, right. Because we're here to serve our clients.
Yeah, and he's talented enough to know to do that.
Exactly. Exactly. I see the whole thing as presets of like, here's the this is what I see is like the equivalent of the analogies of food always works well with music. And so I use the one with the master bus thinking it's like starting with a cup of salt and you want to make some soup. What ingredients do you have to use to make that the right amount of salt? And that's what I see people doing with presets on. So intent aside, and so that's why I said there's sort of like a sort of soapboxy, but also, I also total respect. So it's only that sort of mentality that drives me nuts, not your mentality.
No,
so.
and I can absolutely see it because my mentality is how you ended up with that. People saw other people doing what I believe I'm doing, and then they're like, shit, we're putting EQs on everything. It's going on every track for the rest of my life, And, there's many songs where, it doesn't need this on tech, and I'll just do it.
Right.
Right. Which is easy enough.
Right. I get that. And one of the reasons that kind of bums me or gets me a bit is because this kind of stuff has come up a lot in the immersive world. Mm-hmm. Because people are processing things so heavily along the way, and then getting to a spot where it's a way. I mean, you've got two speakers. You're trying to get all this information out of two speakers, and everybody is, getting rid of dynamic range or things that pop out, or trying to find ways to get instruments to be heard. So we're squeezing all of this. But when we have the space and the dynamics to be able to use, we don't need to process it the same way.
No.
So people who deliver stems like pre-processed because, hey, that's my sound, and if you combine it together, it becomes the stereo, most of the time doesn't work in this world. You have to go back further than that.
Yeah, and that's always something that's been very interesting to me as people have transitioned into this world, is the way that they're dealing with what I would consider groups, which in your world is beds, right?
Right. Maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah. But
depending on the format.
Yeah. The big thing is, it's a lot more object-based. So things are individual as they go to the speakers versus the gluing that happens that people talk about with all these bus processing.
Right.
And watching people try and navigate that world has been very interesting, because these people who are mixing with cups of salt, they're fucked. Like, they're like, I can't put ozone over all this crap.
Exactly right. right. Well, and what would happen if you do? And here's the thing too, is like we were talking about the listening on headphones. If you're in the immersive world, like the best thing about this is space. Is bringing the listener into, as I would say, an active listening state versus a passive listening state.
Yes.
Where you're paying attention to the music, not that it's just on, and it's because it's so, let's just say loud or compressed or, hurts the ears or something like, people turn it down or move on to another song. What's great is when people are paying attention, they're listening to the art. What we want is people to listen to the craft of the songwriting, that guitar part, that, the tone, like all of the things that make the composition and the artist what they are for themselves. And when we take as much of that away as possible, it's we also then are not necessarily into, maybe the art itself. I mean, I think a better way to say that is I totally lost my train of thought. I was heading down a different path.
I got other questions.
Yeah.
How do you run 22 channels through stereo gear?
I don't. I do and I don't.
Is it 11 at a time? You just...
No. You know what? I got when I first started doing so analog mastering in the immersive domain, and so there's what I was gonna hit was a little bit on the compression side of things, the glue, real quick, and I was winding to get there. But the glue aspect of what works out of stereo is not what works out of this.
Yes.
And what happens is the more that people go, we need to limit the dynamic range, and so then now the more that you're listening on headphones, the more that the space goes right back to being two bullhorns shouting in your ears, rather than things that are localized outside of your head. So we have an opportunity, I think, as an industry to reimagine how we're creating these records. Different ways of tracking, different conceptualized captures of space, stuff like that, to be able to then move forward into this world if you need to, but maintain the coolness of what all this does.
And that's exactly what we were talking about last night. Something like a Afro-Cuban band is what we were talking about being ideal for a format like this, because those people play music in a circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can stand in that circle and you can envision where people are. And we were talking about people getting wild with their surround mixes and throwing the wrong shit in the back, you know? But we are excited about things like, listening to an orchestra from the conductor's point of view, where the chairs come down the sides a little bit, but don't go all the way behind you, because they don't, you know? And I think that, as people get away from what I call the quadrophenia effect, where they're just throwing hi-hats around and shit like that.
I would say the flaming lips of, if you ever listen to Yoshimi Battles a Robot or something, it's the same, like the drums move, go like this, and everything else stays the same. Like, that's wacky, but those guys it works, but John Mayer, that wouldn't work.
Absolutely.
So knowing your client is also a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that as people progress into, just like with stereo, you had Van Gelder putting pianos over here and horns over here, and completely different stereos spectrums than what people are used to now. We're going to see things level out in a way that surround and binaural sound becomes, I think, more homogenized. Would you believe?
I think with any new format, there's a discovery period. There's the toddler running around the field figuring it out,
Yes.
and then we start to solidify a little bit about sort of best practices. With stereo, Beatles, they were like focused on the stereo. I mean, on the mono version of. Still, Sgt. Pepper Mono, to me, is the best version of that album. All the other stuff is cool, and it was a throwaway for them to go, we can do this, so let's do that. Like, you put on any kind of record from that day that was meant to, somebody was like, oh, let's just have some fun with this. It's cool on speakers, headphones, kind of nauseating. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but they were figuring it out until realizing that there were some real physical limitations, like low end, in phase, low end information really caused that the kick drum and the bass and the anchor of the vocals, best practices are let's put this in the middle and let's do this. In this world, we really don't have that best practices. We're still toddling around the field at the moment, figuring out where things can go that make sense.
Yes.
And we have the ability to do all of that. And I think maybe we'll get to some spot, and there will always be somebody like, Flaming Lips or something, something interesting. I worked on this record this year, Lovecraft.
Okay.
Which is a songwriting collective. I think they do a Halloween record every year, and so it was this amazing Halloween record that was it's just, it can be anything you want, and it was this great music and sound beds and sound design and sort of skits and things like that, and stuff was in just interesting, cool places because it could be. And it made a whole lot of sense. But again, a symphony, you're not necessarily going to do that. So knowing your content, knowing your audience, knowing the intent of the creator of what they want to get out of it, opens up all these possibilities. But we haven't come into a spot really where, we've got like the kick drum has to be that channel.
Yep.
We're not into, and the nice thing about this is we don't really have to do that so much, except for paying attention to the headphone, what's going to happen. And I think this is where mastering is also a really big deal, is knowing that you're not having, if I get a bunch of objects, either a bed, a bunch of objects, some combination of, and I hear something that needs to be adjusted, I could go to a particular object and make an adjustment to it. But how does that then now shift the sound of the whole thing? If that's coming out of this speaker, now I did something to it, that affects this whole. Now things could be off. There could be phasing issues. There could be, tonality issues. Why is it bright on one side, not on the other? And so, these all give opportunities to have great dialogue with the mix engineer as well, to be able to go back and say, here's what I'm hearing. And so there's I see more of a symbiotic relationship, a communication opportunity, in mastering and looking at the immersive side of that without getting in and just sort of trying to strap ozone on it and call it something like that, because we're not there yet, and I don't think it's the right thing to do.
No, I don't believe so either.
No.
And I'm hoping that as, these formats progress, we don't end up in a situation where, people are just trying to pump out, surround mixes with ozone on them.
Yeah, well, hopefully not, unfortunately. Well, and then it goes back to your question about the room. So to me, that headphones, yes, and this is how people are listening now. This is how people are listening. But the MP4s, the codecs are going to change. The binauralization is going to change. There are more companies coming out with different ways to do that. That's going to change. Distribution is going to change. We're listening to the dumbed down version. The MP4s on Apple, and we're listening to the binaural. On the other formats, we're listening to the data reduced versions. Rather than full resolution files. Things are going to change. What's not going to change is this. Speakers and playing back and knowing. And so having a full resolution ability to be able to hear what's going on makes things down the line, makes the decisions about what's down the line, best for the format, and for those different releases. But that goes, back to, putting everything I had into every room that I've worked in, is to make sure that, my judgment or the things that I hear out of it tell me enough of what I need to do. Your question about, putting into the rooms and putting everything you have into it. Yeah, we got to this point and I started talking to my wife. I had actually, that conversation was, I don't want to have a home studio. People have home studios, and my vision of the home studio just mentally is not what I want people to envision my work as, or my space. When she goes, well, just think of it as a residential facility. I went, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more. I can get behind that.
Hey.
And then we got into thinking about that, and then what it would take to do to actually make this work. One of the two of many of the greatest reasons why this was the right thing to do was every place I've worked had some facility impediment, can't move that wall. Landlord won't let you do this. There's no way to get the ceiling any higher. Like there was like all sorts of things that you couldn't do because of other limitations. And so for here then, being dirt, I was able to design this the way I wanted, exactly what I needed, and take everything that I learned at all those different rooms to build this the way I wanted it.
So is this like walking into a dream you had?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how I feel when I walk into make believe. So I get it.
I know, right? You just walk in, you go, oh, this is my space.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other is that you're also like, I'm not spending 5 more figures a month on somebody else's building for a limited amount of time, stuck by their rules and all of that. Like, sometimes those situations are perfect and awesome, and I don't mean in that in any kind of way. I'm just saying, like, for me, the last couple of places have just been like, they're compromised in some way.
No, absolutely. And we're in a transitional period of our time over at Make Believe. We officially closed down the commercial side of the studio in April.
Oh, really?
So now it's my private studio. And I work there with my friends, and there's stuff happening in all of the rooms at all the time. But mostly it's my mixing and mastering, and then lots of recording that we're doing for videos and stuff. And it's been wonderful because you don't realize how. And I'm not trying to be shitty when I say this, but the music industry can infect your life. You're getting phone calls at 2:30 in the morning because someone's change got ate in the vending machine, just like the most random little shit that you don't like think about.
Right.
And they're not truly a big deal, but everything adds up.
Leaving fantasy, the other biggest benefits to move out of that room and having multi-room and folks working for me and stuff like that was that I was finding that I was saying yes to everything that I could to make sure that the rent was covered and all of that stuff was covered, and it was just unbelievably, for one, draining, and it wasn't the clientele. It was just like I had to say yes to this stuff. And the other thing, and I shouldn't say that sounds bad about the people I worked with. Everybody should get treated the same way.
Yes.
If you can get to the point that you're coming to me and saying, "Here's my thing, can you make this?" Like, you get treated the same way. Like, I know how hard it is to get to that spot where here's something to be mastered, and what that means in the world of bands and finances and touring, and what it takes for them to go, I'm going to pay somebody to do this and get this right. So tremendous respect. But I spent most of my time managing, the facility and people and stuff rather than doing the work I wanted to do. And this has allowed me to be really like, I can focus on work.
So since you've built this place and sat down and focused on work, how many Grammy nominations or how many Grammys have you won?
4.
How does that feel? I don't know what it's like to win a Grammy.
You will.
I'm kidding. No. Do you know what it's like to lose one?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I do, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, I know you've been nominated 5. I've been nominated 5 times and I've won 4.
We're like polar opposites. So at least you got that one over there, so we're on the same team on that one.
Well, you need to have the one, so that so then we have this puzzle piece thing.
Yeah, exactly. So next year, you got to pick up another win, and then I got to pick up a win, and then we both got 6 nominations, and then we're polar opposites.
Okay. Yeah. It's been amazing. It's as getting nominated is huge.
Yes.
With the thousands of entries, to get to that point where you're one of the 5 in that world.
Yes.
And there are only, as engineers, there are few opportunities we have, in some categories. And as mastering engineers, there's only 5 categories we're actually even eligible as a mastering engineer.
You want to know something that I just learned about my Grammy nominations, not to toot my own horn, but I just learned that Best Progressive R&B is actually a relatively new category from like 2017 or some shit like that.
Yeah.
And I've been nominated for it 3 times.
Good for you. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So like,
it is a new category.
Yeah, as far as the history of that category goes, Terrace, great job, dude.
Yeah. Awesome. Congrats. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is. It's a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say sort of sideways, when we went from surround to immersive, that was a new version. Because there was R&B, and then we're like, well, how does that be different? As a recording academy goes, like, there's now contemporary blues and traditional blues, same kind of thing. There's a big differentiation between intent of those styles of music. Surround is one thing, and we went to immersive is another, and that's only been 5 years, 6 years or something, and I've won 2 so far, in that. So I'm kind of, we're symbiotic in a lot of ways.
Hey, absolutely.
That's a great question. A kind of a point is that the things started changing, let's just say, when I started focusing on me and my work.
Absolutely.
And this place and what I needed out of here. I have an assistant, I'm a bookkeeper, a manager, and like, I've got all, sort of the infrastructure stuff. But at the end of the day, I literally mean, as you know, the end of the day, 1 o'clock in the morning, I just come down and I'll sit and I'll get something done. And, or I can, sometimes it's a curse. Most times it's a blessing.
You want to know what I like to think of when I think about the curse part?
Yeah.
Have you ever watched Hans Zimmer's Masterclass?
No, actually, I have not.
It's wonderful for a lot of reasons, but my favorite part about it, everybody, is he walks into a studio for the first time with the camera guys,
Yeah.
and he sits down in his chair and he goes, "So this is the prison I've built for myself."
Yeah. Well, right? That's just what it is.
Yeah.
It's a prison we chose to build ourselves, too.
Absolutely.
It was an absolute choice. And again, putting money into, so like doing that, I went all out into here knowing that, this is going to be, the cabling in the walls, the machine, like everything was done. Before we even started with a shovel, Bob Hodis and I, and then in consult with Bob Levy as well. We the room was designed. Like we worked it out before we started building. So we knew what the dimensions needed to be. So we knew what the reflections were going to be. We knew a lot of stuff before walking in. And then it was just a matter of doing proper tuning and placement and some sound treatment.
Did Bob and Bob collaborate on the design of the room for you, or did you design it and then bring them in for their specialties?
Kind of. I mean, it was. I would say it was my design of this is what I wanted to do.
Yes.
This is how I envisioned this.
Yeah.
Bob Hodis was very instrumental in going, okay, cool. What are the aspects of the dimensions that we need?
Yes.
What do we have to do to get the ceiling?
Well, and
How
I
far down do
can
we have to
see
go?
some things in here from these people that are, things I've seen other places.
Yes. Well, some of this stuff, and a lot of this was at the other room. Oh, I was testing something, so weird cable. And then some things like that, like these panels that are on the side here are behind there. That's just a thicker wall. When the light goes away, you can actually see
What
that
about
there
the bass trap in the ceiling?
8 of them up there. Did I tell you about the bass trap?
No, but I've seen this somewhere else, and I heard that Hodis was in that room, and I was like, what's going on here?
Because so we had to come up with a way to do this, and I think this is the first time that I've ever known of this, and I think Bob's time too, and so maybe he took that somewhere else,
Okay.
to another spot. So there's the ceiling here goes up about another 3 feet up above this, and so what we've got are up until about almost not quite that seam over here is rafters. They're going this way, and then plywood that has denim on both sides, and so it's going in between, and they're hanging. So it becomes this.
Okay, and then is that going to do something like, is that a force that shoots a big wave down a small chute, pretty much?
No, it's meant to take the energy, so that's acoustically open, that door. As a matter of fact, the amps for the surround speakers are up there too.
Okay.
And there's air conditioning up there and some things that then keep venting coming down. But that's meant for all the low frequency energy to go up rather than try to push it back this way.
Yeah, it goes up there.
It goes up there
And then
and
gets shot.
it just gets absorbed.
Yep.
It just winds its energy
what do
down.
they call that? We have one of those in our room, but it's not clearly as well done as this.
I forget what that's. But the idea is that it's very passive, and it just gets up and out.
Yeah, and ours is all completely exposed. There's 3 beams, and then there's wood, and then there's like a small gap above the pieces of wood, right?
Oh, no, and so in this case, so that's different than having a cloud.
No, not a cloud.
Okay.
So like ours, there's like slanted pieces of wood, probably every 5 inches or so.
Okay.
And it, what it is called, I remember this, is a cantilevered ceiling.
Okay.
So we have a cantilevered front wall, and then it takes big low frequency energy from the front wall, shoots it up the ceiling, and then it's almost like a passive radiator on a fucking air conditioner up there.
Interesting.
Where, the big waves get pushed up against the ceiling, and there's a small chute above that radiator that forces them into the bass traps in our back wall.
That's
To
cool.
get sucked
That's
up.
cool. Interesting.
So, I think what's happening here is the opposite, where it just comes up here and then gets shot that way
So
to die.
you're doing it's coming this way.
This way.
That's
Yes.
so interesting.
But we have 4.5 feet for our back wall. So our
Okay.
whole back wall is
Yeah.
one giant bass trap. That whole cantilever ceiling, none of that reflection comes back from the back wall. And I think what Bob did is he shoved it up in your ceiling and then just never let it get back to your front wall.
So that was our idea. That was because of to do this underground. Like there's a 12-foot retaining wall right there, and this whole thing here, and it goes down about 3 feet below here. We had to go down and dig because of that retaining wall. I had to put
the L brace or
Yeah.
whatever. Yep, yeah, I know. What
so
you're
there's a
talking about.
whole slab
We've
that's
had to
doing
install
this.
those at some studios in LA. That's like the earthquake protection out here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yep.
So this guy was so it's all this, and then there's the drainage, and then there's the flooring, and then there's a slab, and then there's all the conduit that runs around under the floor and all that kind of stuff. So this goes down a bit, as well as that, like that wall, but because of the dirt and because of the earthquake in this area kind of stuff, potential, and the way that the land is higher on this side than it is on that side, then naturally it wants to go like this. It's going to, over time, wants to push. So there's actually, when you do those posts and then the beams to hold dirt back,
Yes.
there's that on two sides, and then there's the walls too.
Oh.
So it was a lot to make sure that we were covered, and it was going exponentially more expensive to go another foot, another foot. So we had
sheer wall of dirt.
Yeah.
So
and which meant the 12-foot would have been 14 foot, would have been like 16 foot.
How much dirt tonnage did you remove out of here?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Did you just put it in the backyard?
We put a lot of it in the backyard. There's some pictures I've got of that whole sort of this flat spot over here was just this huge mound of dirt, and the back portion, sort of that where that line is back there, is up 2 feet from where it was. And we put 2 feet of dirt back there to fill it up and hauled a whole bunch away.
Yep.
It's amazing how much space dirt takes up when you unpack it.
Absolutely. Yes. It expands for sure.
It does. It totally does. But the idea then was I could build exactly what I wanted and take everything that I had out of this. And a friend of mine, a dear friend and his wife, well, they're both dear friends, has left the city a bunch of years ago to go move up to the Sebastopol area and live with her mom and take care of her and all that, and wrote a record about the idea of, as a duo, as a performing duo, how their life transitioned to get from being involved in living in North Beach in the city and hubbub and nightlife and stuff like that to being in Sebastopol up north. And one of the lines in one of the songs is, next time I move, I won't need to pack. And I'm like, that's profound. Okay, cool. Building this was kind of like, next time I move, I won't need to, like everything is like, this just chips in, right? That's to your point about like, how does it feel to do that instead of giving it to somebody else? And so yeah, I've always like the quality of the room and the gear and the gain structure and wiring and grounding and power and like all of that stuff has been hugely important to take care of, and doing so at somebody else's place sometimes was just hair pulling to make it work, and there was always sometimes a problem, and there are always compromises, and I got a chance to do this without compromise.
I'll say this, this room, just so everybody on the internet is aware, is fucking silent. There is no hard drive spinning in the back. There is no, switching power supply that I hear buzzing in here. Yeah. It's silent.
It's studio doors. I tell you the things that bother me. So I hear that the microphone on the camera. So I hear that when somebody's out front every once in a while, and that's okay. And I hear that. I have these LED lights I can change colors and stuff on, and there are certain temperatures of the lights that whistle.
Okay.
And when you put them together, so I'll sit here and it's super low. You'd never notice it.
But you got to find the right ones that don't do it.
Yeah, well, you find the right combinations of shades sometimes and numbers of, but it's so quiet that you kind of go like, oh, I'm hearing the light bulbs. And you're like, okay, all right, which is great. So, and actually, the first opportunity to have a room being down like this to have natural light. And have a window not be something that's going to cause problems sonically with reflection.
Yeah, because it's way above your head.
Yeah.
And most people who have built these, control rooms that have glass in them, they want to look at drummers, and this, you end up taking over that room and turning it into a purpose-built mastering facility.
Yeah.
And, most people don't realize, like, that's not an easy decision to undo. You either destroy the whole studio or you live with that glass being there.
Right. Right.
This is beautiful, man.
Thank you. Do you want to hear some stuff? Want to play?
Well, I do.
Any questions?
I have questions. We have a thing that we do for all engineers, and I just want to run through it real fast.
I got about like 20 minutes.
This will be very quick. It's 5 questions.
Sure.
And I only want the first thing that pops into your head.
Mac and cheese.
Number 1 equalizer in the box.
Can I
Say the first thing that are popping into your head. Just say
The first thing that pops into my head was it depends.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Why does it depend?
It depends because I don't know what I don't choose the gear I use until I hear what I'm working on. And so I don't make any decisions until I know what it sounds like, because then I'm going to tailor my choice to my needs.
Totally understood. But, you know, if you had to pick, you know, one that you think may be the one, depending on any song that could be coming in, you know, there's clearly probably one or two that are like,
I like the orange from Matt.
okay.
That would be like a go-to if I had some clean palette with stuff. I would say that the Fab Filter EQ is sort of like as an easy go-to, right? Because it's very flexible and stuff to go to and go, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Now, how can I do that maybe somewhere else, or is that the right thing to go to? You know, so the matte stuff, the red and the orange, I like a lot. But I would say the Fab Filter is a great like generic to go to. The McDSP Active EQ is another one I go to very often.
Is that the 6000?
6000,
Yep.
that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
Compressor in the box.
Massenburg.
Okay, the DRC2, the new one?
Yes.
Yes.
I was there's a new one coming that I've been using that's the 3.
Oh, it's not the one that just came out?
It's multi-track. I've been using the multi-track version of it. So there's a 16 channel, like it's all linked together and stuff.
Can I see it with my eyes?
Yeah. It looks exactly the same, except there's some functions in it which allows you to steer who's driving the boat as far as
side chaining?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, very interesting.
In the different channels. But essentially it's the same thing. I love that. So back on.
Yep.
the 2030 is a go-to for me, the Massenburg. But his compressor, the in-the-box compressor, to me is everything I want that I can do in the box.
But you're a fan of how dynamic range controllers in general work.
Love it.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And most people have a hard time wrapping their heads around the fact that there's pretty much 3 zones in a dynamic range controller when it comes to how you apply, you know, dynamic range control to those zones of audio and how they trigger things.
Yes. And it's also very program dependent. So
yes.
The thing is, it's not very like sort of preset dependent. Like
No.
this is for a kick drum or this is for whatever. Like that's one of those issues with that kind of stuff, is that what you feed it can cause it to be wildly awesome or unbelievably destructive.
Yes, and you need to know how to be able to go in and modify, you know, especially when it comes to things like the peak and the fast, like you can just destroy audio with those things.
Right, you can really destroy you can be so heavy-handed with it, and that's one of the things I love about it is the power about it, so that's my go-to.
Yes, you know, I love DRCs. I've rebuilt a Soundtech 200, the original stereo mastering version one, and then I just ended up using it on lead vocals for years. I loved it.
Nice.
So, you know, in the box limiter.
In the box limiter. Daniel Weiss.
Okay, amazing.
I go to the Weiss.
And the Weiss, is that what you're using to get loud?
I use a handful of things sort of dependent on the content. Is it symphonic where there's this? Is there transients because there's that? But in general, I'm using 2 or 3 to kind of step to it in ways that don't destroy it by trying to be too heavy-handed. What I find is that one doesn't always fit all, but if you're trying to do a little bit with this and a little bit with that, is instead of trying something to be the Swiss Army knife of limiters, compressors, do a little bit for this because I'm trying to pull this up, do a little bit of this because I'm trying to ease these transients down. And so
same thing with the concept of something like that.
Exactly.
Yep.
So using multiples in the Daniel Weiss stuff is fantastic.
So that's what I was just going to ask. Have you do you do that with multiple Weisses?
No, sometimes I'll use like the limiter from Fab Filter as a final on the backside of that. Sometimes,
okay, so you'll use Weiss, kind of get you into the range of where you want to be, and then you use something like Fab Filter to get you loud and heavy-handed.
More protectionate. Okay. I would use a few along the way, like maybe a couple of Weisses or the SP in the box, the SPL Iron, or the Massenburg, and then usually the last thing in the chain would probably be for something like that would be the Weiss. And then maybe I would put the L2 or something like that on as a safety.
Ooh, see L2.
Not the L2. Wait, not the L2. Sorry,
Pro L.
Pro L.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah, no. That's not my.
I was about to say I am a fan of L2, but at this point, like that is a very distinctly 2006 sound.
It is. Yes.
Which I love.
And you know what? And if it's appropriate, it's awesome. It's
I mean,
the right tool for the right job.
Manny Marquand's killing it. So
can't argue with that.
No.
Nope.
in the box, and these ones get a little bit more outside of the realm of mastering engineers. I'm assuming the next one, you're probably going to have something that doesn't have to do with what a lot of people think of, but delay. Do you use any delays in your work?
In mastering, no.
No. So never even like offsets or doing anything where you got to align channels or?
No, because I'm not doing anything where I need to do that. So are we talking stereo, or we're talking immersive, or both when you ask these questions?
No,
because some of these things don't work for that.
Just in the box. So like, I don't know if there's any like offset delays that you have to do to line up these beds for immersive or anything like that,
No, my job is to notice that there's a problem
and then
call
tell
them.
someone else. Okay, perfect. So,
well, go back to the engineer and go, I'm doing this because this is what this is doing, and if you can tighten this up, then the smearing in the headphones won't be an issue, or then whatever this happens. So my job is to be attentive and notice those things, and then have the dialogue.
Yeah,
and then solve the problem. Because if they go, can't go back to it, can't do that, then maybe I would do that. Maybe I would do a 3 millisecond slip on this or something like that. What I would find is that for something like that, I wouldn't do a delay as much as I would do a slip, a time alignment. Like I would just, I would move the file or delay the file a little bit. I use Nuendo. I'm a Nuendo user. I can, and I maybe Pro Tools has this, but in the immersive world, it's what I use. That I can just go back and slip the channel.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. Without having to move the audio, because then it still is lined the way it needs to be lined
as
up.
far as your archives go.
Yeah.
No, and I just entirely curious because most mastering engineers, they're not going to have a delay.
Yeah.
But the next one, some people do. Do you utilize a reverb at all in your work?
That I will sometimes.
Yeah, like is there ever a song that comes over and the fucking tail's cut off and you got to shoot it out again so that you can, print a nice tail or something like that?
That is like the main 90% reason I would use a reverb is generally the tail got cut off when somebody's thinking about single. So like, let's just say, as we were talking about, like somebody mixes a handful of records, they're not thinking about the entire package and how it works or the transitions. As the assembly part of this, one of the things I really love, and I don't hand this off to folks. I like to, as a hands-on guy, I like to do it myself. But the pacing of the album, how it transitions, sequencing.
Yep.
That is a huge. To me, an album is an album. It keeps you interested. Putting extra space, making it tight, doing things that keep people actively listening. How does it feel as a body of work, not a collection of songs? To me, is huge. And sometimes people will tail off because they don't know what's coming next, or they don't know how. So sometimes I'll have to add a little reverb, sometimes to just extend the tail. Occasionally with something like, let's just say, jazz or symphony or something like that, if somebody's mixing in, let's say they're mixing in a very live room, and it comes out, it's a little drier than they thought, that it needs a little reverb. I just mastered Working Man's Dead, the immersive version, the Atmos version for Grateful Dead.
Yes.
And Mickey's like, hey, can you put a little, it's a little dry. Can we? So I ended up doing a little bit of reverb on the Atmos version, but that was in consult with.
Yes.
And then they went back and made a couple of mix changes and went like, well, let's not do this to this. What we found is that's what we want to do, but we don't want it with this and this and that rather than the blanket. So as you know, the limitation is it's all or none.
Yes. So they've got to come with what they want to be able to,
Right. And so there was an experiment side, and it was like, oh, that's all great, and we would have gone with that except for maybe this one, we didn't want the lead vocal to also have that on it. And so, so sometimes it's purposes of demonstration to the client too.
So what do you typically like to use for your reverb? Do you have a couple tools that you utilize?
Yeah, the Seventh Heaven, that's doing the Bricasti. So back to that, I think they did a great job with it, and having those things dialed in, I love it. I use that.
And recall.
and recall. Well, yeah, and and that with that plugin that was available for a while for those. I always want. It's not requisite because that's the hardware guys. I always what's the?
It was Liquid Sonics or somebody who did.
Liquid Sonics did that, but who was the Isotope bought them.
You're talking about Michael Crichton's company, Phoenix Verb and
that one.
Exponential Audio.
Exponential Audio. I just was this morning. I use the Exponential Audio a lot.
The Symphonic
and the Stratus.
The Stratus. That's what it is. Stratus.
Yeah.
That's their 22 channels surround. They killed every other reverb plugin that they made for you. See, I'm just saying, there's something happening with you surround guys pushing this industry around. And
the stereo versions are great too.
You're killing reverbs, Michael.
I don't want to kill reverbs. Sense of space is I would never want to kill reverbs because sense of space is. But this goes back to those opportunities of things, not to tangentialize off, but in the tracking process now, I think in the immersive world we have an opportunity to not put a microphone into a speaker, And if you capture something from a couple of feet away, like envisioning how things are going to be, and if you want that guitar amplifier to sound like it's coming over here, mic it from 2 feet away.
Yes.
Now you already have the waveform the way it's supposed to be, and the distance is built in. Like, think ahead.
Yeah, and you know, I actually saw an interesting marketing campaign that's being pushed by DPA microphones right now. I think because of Spattle Audio and them trying to get into it.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand about microphones, and like even the best engineers get fucked up about this shit, is proximity effect.
Yes.
You know? And it's one of those things, proximity effect does not only occur an inch and a half away from the microphone. If you move something like a DPA 6 feet out, you're gonna be down 6 dB at 100 hertz compare if that was, you know, a foot within.
Right.
So, you know, if you can learn your EQ moves to be able to get the sound that you want while also capturing the space, I think that is going to be a big jump towards getting truly great in the room sounding productions, is people learning how to use equalizers again when they have microphones further away from the sound source.
Right. Well, you know, EQs were developed to compensate for bad mic choices, bad mic placement.
Yes.
My hope is that the art of mic placement is now, you know, comes back to the forefront. Choosing the right microphone, not just like, let's just capture this and then put it in the space later on and capture it. Like, let's be thoughtful about it and go, okay, cool, this DPA works for that, or this DPA works for that. You know, oh, an Omni, I get another octave out of the low. Maybe we ought to do that. Oh, here's what's going on in the space. Okay, cool. How do maybe we change and turn the amp to go a different direction. Now we have let's face the mic a different way. Like, that experimentation is what got me into music in the first place.
Yeah, and you just brought up a great point, which is using pressure gradient microphones versus omnidirectional microphones.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And those things, when people start thinking about, you know, surround and immersive audio in the whole picture, the way that you're trying to think about it, I think that we're going to end up with some truly great productions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that, exactly right. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities of immersive audio taking the forefront is re-envisioning technique and recording possibilities and production and thinking about this rather than, you know, as production, we don't do as an industry as many like demo and then make the record kind of things we used to. People are making essentially, a lot of times the demo is the record, you know, and they're putting everything they have into it. I don't mean no disrespect in that way, but you know, the chance to try to, you know, figure it out is, let's capture this and then figure out what to do with it, rather than, now we know what we're doing, we know what we like, now let's go record it with these things intent. I had to put this microphone and did that because I was in my bedroom and I only had the ability to do something like this. Okay, cool, and I put this kind of space on it, great. Now when we make the record, let's create that sense of space from the start rather than sort of shoehorning it in.
Yeah, and now every day, you know, people are like, oh, we got to use spiff to take the bedroom out and, you know, then put some reverb on it.
And that processing adds up.
It does.
We were talking about process, like, so for me, I do all my stereo mastering is still all out of the box.
Yes.
You ask about plugins, and I'll use a few things sometimes if I do a tweak or something like that. But for the most part, everything is done here before I get into the system.
I have to say, you know, this is, you know, a lot of people have seen a lot of the gear that you have over here advertised to them. But there's one piece of gear here that is not something that was really advertised to people, and it's incredible. Will you speak on your ear?
Oh man, that is that goes with me forever. That will never change. I've changed things along the way, but I did just get somewhat recently. Okay, so the EAR stuff.
Yeah.
The A22, A23, fantastic Pultec versions of. The Pultec never made a stereo version, much less a cut and boost. You know, the same thing. When Tim DePerricini made this, I mean, it was just, it's awesome. I love it, and it is just a fantastic piece of gear.
And it's fully stepped, right?
No, it's not stepped. There's a detent for 0.
Okay.
So I can get back to 0, but it's not stepped. So
but you've never had any problems with recall with it. You're happy with it.
I'm happy with it.
How do you
I yellow legal pad. I'm an analog guy. All my sessions are, you know, while I'm capturing and I'm listening, I'm writing down my settings. Part of it is, I mean, there's a process. It's like, you know, when you're trying to remember something, that writing something down has you remember it, because then you can remember the process and how your hand works, and there's a physiology to it. To me, listening and writing things down also is, I'm paying attention to the sound, I'm listening to it, here's what's going on, and I'm writing it down. And it's a way of sort of ingraining sort of the process and the whole thing into it. And so Yeah.
No, I'm 100% with you, especially when it comes to recalling things like the console. I've found that, you never notice the happy accidents until you're recalling the console.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you look over and you go, wow, I just had this.
Why the fuck was that routed there?
It worked. Well, and you had asked something earlier about analog and how do you keep all these channels together. So in immersive mastering, so I played for a while and I worked through, kind of processes, and I've been doing immersive mastering. I think I built even the Fantasy was one of the first rooms for doing it. And I was doing analog to begin with, and I found that and experimenting combinations and hybrid stuff, and I found that there's too many variables at this point in analog of, like, I'm not going to have this chain for 70 objects and a 10-channel bed.
Yes.
It's not practical.
Yes.
So how do you do something like that? Can you capture it a few times? Can you run in and out of 12 channels of gear and then get stuff in back? But I've found that the tolerances to make it work, like let's just say you're running through a transformer in and out. Like let's say you're just doing a D to A and an A to D and you want to run through like a sound making device, one EQ, two band, shelf, whatever it is, like you're doing something. That the potential for phase problems, the potential for the gain structure being off on any one of those by 1/10 of dB or 2/10 of a dB causes the imaging to be not what you want. And you add that, compound that by 80 channels or whatever, you're going to mess this up. And it is not to that state yet that we can be able to do that. So, trial and error has led me to believe that immersive mastering is in the box.
No, and I know exactly what you're talking about just from my world. When I send a test tone down a single mono channel on the SSL, I've got 3 stereo buses, A, B, and C, and I can assign that to A, and I'll watch the 2 meters, and one of them will be slightly off from the other.
Yeah.
Just switch to B, and they're both slightly different from there. Switch to C, and they're none of that thing.
Yeah.
You have to literally, with any amazing gear, if you wanted it to be dead on 0 every day, you're gonna have to sit there with a multimeter and
I walk in, my first thing every morning, besides turn things on and let it get warmed up, is calibrate.
Yep.
I run test tone before I get started because any different day, the tubes may be a little bit different. Something may be, relative humidity, whatever.
Negative 18 equals 1.228
exactly
volts.
Right. Negative 18 is where I go.
Yep. So, but do you use the BBC reference standard here?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
So everything is set at that, and so I'll go through and I'll test and I'll just make sure that my chain is correct, and I will. Well, calibrate after I decide what I'm using.
Yes.
So back to that thing is, at first is I'll listen, because I don't always use that. I almost always use that. I don't always use anything in here, but
if you do, you're using the.
But when I decide, like, you know what, this project needs this, and this, then I run it through because they can drift.
Yeah, I'll say this. I've only had a chance to speak to Tim once in my life. He was an absolute heavyweight in the world. Is worse off without him.
Yeah.
He clearly cared about audio more than most.
Yeah. So Paul Stubblebine, Paul was good friends with him and had worked with him, and Paul turned me on to this. I actually used the 660s for a very long time, 15 years plus years, until the Unfairchild came out, and I found that I could get what I wanted out of the 660s that Tim did, but also I could do some other things, the feed forward, things that it didn't have.
You're loving this thing?
I do.
Yep.
I do. Yeah, it's great. They did a really great job. Everything that Eric and everybody put into that it caused me to get rid of something I thought I would never get rid of, is the 660s from EAR.
Yep.
So yeah, and this EQ, having the boost, you asked about it, but the 2 shelves and the boost and cut on both sides, like it's such a musical EQ. It just sounds great.
I've actually never had the chance to use one. The only a piece of gear that I ever used at Tim's was one of those 660s, the single channel with the tweaker on the front.
Yeah.
But
he did some, like with Paul, like with the tape project. So back to that. Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
Back to that is the ATR. So he built some electronics.
Oh yeah, I've seen Bob's.
Yeah. So right. So he's got the 1-inch mod on the ATR that we use for the tape project masters.
Oh god.
So it's running through Tim's electronics. That's why, I mean,
give me a subscription.
This
is what I want. This is that sort of stuff I want on the shelves at the studio.
Nice. Right.
That's I think that lounges should be classy. My lounge right now just got a vending machine that didn't have food in it for 2 years. So, I'm kind of re-envisioning that, and I have my dad's record player, and I'm thinking, maybe buy some you know, of those new Tenoys. They just came out with the little golds again, you know, and buy a couple of those Tenoys, put the Mitsubishi down there, and, you know, grab something like one of those Pioneer 707s and just set up the little hi-fi spot finally in the lounge.
You know what's super fun? Like, take this a step further, is this is the best version of mixtapes.
Yep.
Make your own tapes for parties or gatherings or things like that. So you have
cut them up in the quarter-inch reels.
Cut and put a quarter-inch reel of a full out, like this song, and then you've got reels of things, and then you go in and like you're playing, and then you switch the reel, and then you've got a variety.
Switch the mixtape, dude.
You switch the mixtape. Like I do that. I had I just took it out a little bit ago, but I had a 1500 in the living room, and so I would do that, and if I had people over and stuff, I would have.
Oh, that's
various
so cool.
tapes that we would just play, and it says it's to me, and without getting, I don't want to be judgmental of anybody, but to me, it's the analog format that makes sense. Yep. I'm not a big vinyl. I like old. I think that there are good reasons and not so good reasons why vinyl is still out there. And to me, if I was going to choose an analog format that doesn't change from beginning to end, doesn't have cutting issues, doesn't have all the other problems with manufacturing, and all of that, is to make tapes.
Yep.
That's the analog sound.
Absolutely.
To me. So
I'm into it. I think that could definitely be the vibe.
It's so fun. You should do that in your lounge. I think that'd be awesome.
I think so too.
You got your here's the night mix, here's the day mixes, here's the rock mix and the blues, Well, I put the record player up there, so if people want to come up there and bring their records, they could sit down and do it. But then they could see, oh dang, we got a Beatles mix here. Right.
Yeah, I will say this: if I start making mixtapes on quarter-inch loops, I'm gonna try and go after. There's some like pretty coveted DJ spots in Omaha, like DJing at some of the pools during the summer.
Nice.
I'm like, I'm gonna DJ now. I'll just show up and drop my quarter-inch deck, press play, and leave.
Jump in the pool, hang out, right? Right. And people go, "This sounds amazing," right? Yeah. That'd be fun. That'd be fun to DJ. Like, give me a second. Stop dancing. Hold still. I got to change tape.
I get two of them, so then I can have a crossfade.
Oh yeah, right. That's old school DJing,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's like back to the day in mastering. Like when I got into it. Like we'll circle back to the beginning of this was tape machine, console, tape machine, and you would capture and have to go
through. A preview
through.
and program, right?
Preview and a program. You have to go back through and listen and go from, and you build in the leader as going to be the difference, and you'd cut the, to try to get and you have a master fader when you were doing that.
So back in those days, did you use 2 stereo equalizers or did you have a quad equalizer?
Yeah. 2 stereo. So Paul had this old beyond the gear that we had, like 2 Sontecs.
Okay.
We had 2 of everything kind of thing, but also was this old JVC cutting console.
Okay.
That had also built in an A section and a B section. So you get A section right while you're capturing this one, and then you run, because it was meant to go to the lacquer directly.
Yes.
So you get all your notes, and you'd tape machine, and you'd start playing the first tape while it's doing that, and then you'd get the second.
Run and do the
then
second
you'd get the
side.
second, and then you'd switch at the right time, and it was a dance, and it was.
Yeah.
And that was a great way to get into it. That was.
I still love looking at Bernie's rooms because he's still got the A and the B side, but the A side's just been abandoned. It's covered with shit.
Yeah. So you had when you said that you had to like 5 questions. Was that all?
Those were the 5
okay,
questions.
I didn't know if there was.
The EQ, compression, limiter, reverb, delay.
Got it.
Yep.
I was gonna say it's like that old saying. There are 3 kinds of people in this world: those that can count, and those that can't.
Well, we got into them, so they turned into one question that turned into another question.
Okay.
No, thank you so much for your time. I do have to ask. Have you had a chance to try the Sontec?
I have. It sounds great.
Okay.
You know what? It's everything that I wanted out of this. I think great job with it, and I did want to say that. I'm glad you asked that because one of the things I found about the Sontec. So when George passed, George Horn, and we were talking about. I almost took over his business, or we were going to work together, and he was looking at retiring and stuff, and. Of all the gear that he had, the lathes were great, and a couple of other things, and the Sontecs. He had 2 Sontecs that he used. And one of the reasons I sort of decided against trying to get the Sontecs and all was that they were just a little noisy. I just remember them being really just having some issues with noise floor with them and super quiet stuff. And what I love about the plug-in is that it doesn't have that noise floor.
Yes.
I get that sound, and it's a clean sound. So well done. Kudos.
Yes.
Kudos.
Thank you.
Yeah.
BJ
and everybody. Awesome. Yeah.
Oh yeah, BJ killed it.
Yeah.
If you ever want to go down that Sontec
BJ.
path, or if you ever have any friends that need any help, there's actually a wonderful engineer who's working with Burgess now. His name is John Chapman. He's an ex-Raytheon engineer, and they're building equalizers, and we have hundreds of amplifiers in stock. So if anyone anyone needs HS1000s or 2030s, like
Okay.
everything's available, and we're actually about to start on a run of 25 ITIs, just like the old ones.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, we got more to talk about after this is all.
Yeah, and really like any
Yeah.
of that stuff, and also when it comes to stuff like this, he is fixing GML stuff too. It's very
Nice.
very under wraps, but George is not taking
not-
So John is
That's why I don't turn that off.
Yeah.
It's been on for like 5 years.
yeah it's one of those
I
things.
don't want the power supply to go down or anything like that.
So he's running his own company, alongside Burgess, which is called Glitchworks, and
Okay, I didn't know
Glitchworks will help you if you need.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, so,
That's great to know. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but
Knock on wood, it's been super solid.
yeah,
It's-
George makes good gear, so
well, he's a no compromise person.
yes,
He's like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it.
yes,
But that's what we are too, in
Yeah.
our own way. Like, if we're going to do this, I'm going to do this. This isn't just like, sort of hand holding and slap something on it and say, here's what this is. It's like intentional listening, intentional decisions, intentional like communication and dialogue. And I think that's where the craft and art of mastering and engineering in general, we're doing anything in this business, is doing it with intent to be able to serve the craft as service providers. Again, back to that, as our job is to help other people. And the problems that we can solve are the places that we can help them go.
absolutely.
And I treasure that. Every record is just special because we're helping people. Like, there's so much music being put out there every day.
60,000 songs a day.
60,000 songs a day. How are you going to get attention? Well, do it right. Like, to be out is not the same thing as this is something that's meaningful to me.
Yes.
So when somebody wants just like, oh, it's just more important that it goes out, like, okay, I get it, cool. But when somebody's like, this is my record, and for the rest of my life, this will be my record, I want it to represent me.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Yeah, and you have worked so very hard to build your name and reputation up into a place where your record or your name on a record holds weight. The work that you did, people are proud to have Michael Romanowski master their record, and people talk about the fact that this went to Coast Mastering.
Thank you.
To be able to build a facility in a studio that represents yourself so wholly, I think it's incredible, man.
That's so kind. I appreciate that. We work we work hard, head down. We do our thing. And sometimes you pop up and you go, oh. And somebody goes, oh, yeah, so I go, oh, really? Okay, cool. Or sometimes, you get a nomination and you go like, oh, I'm just working hard.
Yep.
And like, oh, that's awesome, cool. And then, then now here's today's record, And so that's very kind. I really appreciate that because we don't always know. Like, we just try to do the best we can. Fantastic.
These are Neumann's up here, right? These are the
310s.
Okay.
Yeah.
They have another one, the 120s? Is that what they're called?
They have
Smaller ones.
the 120s, a little bit smaller. They have an 80 that
420s are the big boys.
420s are the big boys. They would be not quite equivalent, but something to these guys.
Yeah.
The new 150s are pretty spectacular, though.
Yeah,
The small ones are.
I think the only ones that I've tried are those 120s, the smaller guys, and I thought that they were incredible, man.
I have a pair of those that I carry when I go do remote. I still record and I still mix and I still do live sound. So back to your question earlier about doing stuff, I still love to do those kinds of things. I still like to go do that because it's fun. It's good to know where people are coming from. It's good to be involved in every aspect that comes up. If I go do a remote recording, I get 120s in a bag and I show up and
That's your rig.
that's my rig.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually have those tri-orbit stands.
Yes.
Those are. There's one that's a Y.
Yeah, we were just looking at it yesterday over at Denton's.
I got a plate on each one, so I can take one stand with the Y and I mount the 120s and I just set it right in front of me, and I've got this stereo monitoring with one stand.
So everybody keeps talking about these tri-orbital stands just being the coolest thing in the world.
I'll show you some in the other room. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're bullet. How many times have you bought stands that break and the things don't, whatever, and like they're just bulletproof.
I have a whole like old drum hardware tub full of Atlas parts.
yeah. They're and Ryan and the guys that run a really great company. They're a little expensive, but they are spot on and they're great, and they do exactly what they're supposed to do, and they will stand the test of time. So I can't recommend them enough. Also.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely have to try some out. I was actually looking at their company recently because they make what seem to be very nice stands for hanging microphones from the ceiling.
Yes.
Which I'm very interested in doing.
Well, so in combination with that, they're tying together with isoacoustics.
Okay.
So you see, like I've got the Gaias underneath that are doing the isolation from there, and they've got a new product which is I'm actually isolating from hanging, but they
Okay.
do a wall mount with that, and they work with Tri-Orbit, and they're building pieces together to do the isolation for the wall mount for the Tri-Orbit stuff.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, man. And I'd love to see the other room.
Yeah, let's go see the other room.